The candles flickered on the birthday cake, 70 tiny flames dancing in the dim light of our family dining room. I watched my father's face glow with quiet joy as everyone sang, their voices blending into a chorus that should have felt warm. Instead, I felt the familiar weight of invisibility settling over my shoulders like an old coat I could not shake off. My name is Daniela. I am 37 years old, and for the past 6 years I have lived in this house with my father, caring for him as his health declined. The mortgage had been paid off decades ago, but the bills never stopped coming. Neither did the repairs, the medications, the countless doctor appointments that filled my calendar like a second job. I worked remotely as a freelance graphic designer, which gave me the flexibility to be present when he needed me. My brother, on the other hand, visited maybe twice a year if we were lucky. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. I had spent 3 days preparing his favorite meals, decorating the dining room with photographs spanning 7 decades of his life, and coordinating with relatives who lived across the state. My hands still smelled faintly of the garlic and rosemary I had used to season the roasted chicken. The table groaned under the weight of dishes I had prepared alone while my brother showed up an hour late with a bottle of wine and a grin that suggested he had done something remarkable. The singing ended. My father blew out the candles with help from my youngest niece who clapped her hands with pure delight. I smiled despite the exhaustion creeping through my bones. Then my brother stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I had refinished myself last spring. I have an announcement, he said, his voice cutting through the chatter. Everyone turned to look at him. My brother Javier had always commanded attention effortlessly. He was 42, tall and broad-shouldered with the kind of confidence that made people listen, even when he said nothing of substance. He worked in commercial real estate, a career that suited his talent for selling dreams and bending truths. As you all know, Dad's getting older, and it's time we made some practical decisions about his care and his assets. Javier raised his wine glass, the red liquid catching the candle light. After talking with Dad, we've decided that the house will be sold. It's too much for one person to maintain, and the money will go toward making sure he's comfortable in a proper facility. My stomach dropped. I glanced at my father, whose expression remained neutral, almost blank. Had they really discussed this, or was this another one of Javier's unilateral decisions dressed up as family consensus? And Daniela, Javier continued, turning his gaze toward me with a smile that did not reach his eyes. You've had a good run living here rent-free, but it's time to start packing. The house is mine now, and we've already got buyers interested. Consider this your notice, freeloader. The room erupted in laughter. My aunt slapped the table, wheezing with amusement. My uncle raised his glass in agreement. Even my father cracked a smile, though it seemed more confused than cruel. I sat frozen, my fork hovering over my untouched plate, as my family toasted my brother for finally taking charge and doing what needed to be done. Nobody looked at me. Nobody asked if I had been consulted. Nobody seemed to remember that I was the one who had kept this house standing. Who had paid for the new roof when the old one started leaking? Who had covered the property taxes when money got tight? Who had sacrificed my own savings and social life to make sure our father did not spend his final years alone? I set my fork down carefully, the metallic clink barely audible over the celebration. My throat tightened, but I refused to let them see me cry. I had learned long ago that tears only made things worse in this family. Weakness was blood in the water and Javier was always circling. Congratulations, someone said, clinking their glass against Javier's. About time someone stepped up, another voice added. I pushed my chair back slowly and stood. Nobody noticed. They were too busy laughing, too busy celebrating my brother's supposed generosity and business acumen. I walked toward the back door, my footsteps muffled by the noise behind me. My heart pounded in my chest, a steady drum of anger and humiliation that I could barely contain. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped onto the porch. I closed the door behind me, muffling the sounds of the party. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing in the scent of jasmine from the garden I had planted 3 summers ago. My hands trembled as I pulled my phone from my pocket. I had known this was coming. Not tonight, not like this, but I had known Javier would eventually make a move. He always did. And I had prepared for it in ways he could never imagine. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. My thumb hovered over the screen for just a second. Then I pressed call. The line rang twice before someone answered. This is Daniela, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. It's time. I need you to come to the house now. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. 10 minutes. That was all I needed to wait. 10 minutes for everything to change. Standing on that porch, I let my mind drift back through the years that had brought me to this moment. It was not a single event that had led to tonight's humiliation. It was 1,000 small cuts, a slow erosion of respect and recognition that had started long before my father's health began to fail. I remembered the day I moved back home. It was 6 years ago, right after my father's first stroke. The doctors had said he would recover most of his mobility, but he would need constant supervision and help with daily tasks. My mother had passed away 8 years earlier from cancer, and since then, my father had lived alone in this house, the same house where Javier and I had grown up. Javier had been the first to suggest that someone should move in with Dad. "He can't be alone anymore," he had said over the phone, his voice filled with what sounded like genuine concern. "One of us needs to step up." I had just ended a long-term relationship and was living in a small apartment across town. My design work allowed me flexibility, so I volunteered immediately. "I can do it," I told Javier. "I'll move in and take care of him." "Are you sure?" Javier had asked, though his relief was palpable. "It's a big commitment." I'm sure that was the last time Javier had questioned whether I could handle the responsibility. Once I agreed, he disappeared from the conversation entirely, popping up only occasionally to ask how Dad was doing or to complain about how stressful his own life had become. He never offered to help with bills. He never took time off work to drive Dad to appointments. He never spent sleepless nights wondering if the labored breathing from the next room meant another emergency. But I did all of that. I restructured my entire life around my father's needs. I canceled client meetings to sit in hospital waiting rooms. I turned down freelance projects that would have required travel. I learned how to prepare low-sodium meals, how to help him with physical therapy exercises, how to manage his medications down to the exact minute they needed to be taken. The house itself became my second full-time job. The plumbing had issues that winter, and I paid a plumber out of my own savings to fix the pipes before they burst. The following spring, the roof developed a leak during a heavy rainstorm, and I took out a small personal loan to cover the repairs because my father's fixed income could not stretch that far. I painted the exterior, replaced the broken fence panels, and maintained the garden because I knew how much my father loved sitting outside on warm afternoons. Through it all, Javier sent occasional text messages. "How's Dad?" he would ask. I would respond with updates, detailed explanations of doctor visits, and medication adjustments. He would reply with a thumbs-up emoji or a brief, "Thanks for handling that." Handling that as if my entire life had become a task he had delegated to me. I remembered the first time Javier made a comment about me living rent-free. It was about 2 years after I moved in. We were at a family barbecue at my uncle's house, and someone asked me how I was managing financially with all the caregiving responsibilities. "It must be nice not having to pay rent." Javier interjected before I could answer. "Daniel's got it pretty easy, living in the house for free while the rest of us have mortgages to worry about." I had laughed it off at the time, made some joke about how changing adult diapers was payment enough, but the comment stuck with me. It stuck with everyone. Soon, other family members started making similar remarks. "You're so lucky to have free housing. Must be nice not to have bills. At least you're saving money." Nobody acknowledged the thousands of dollars I had poured into keeping the house functional. Nobody saw the repairs I had funded, the utilities I had covered. When Dad's pension ran short, the property taxes I had paid when the bill arrived, and he did not have enough in his account. To them, I was just living for free, taking advantage of an old man's generosity. And Javier encouraged that narrative. Every chance he got, he reminded people that I was not paying rent, that I was benefiting from the situation. He never mentioned that he contributed nothing. He never acknowledged that without me, our father would have been forced into a facility years ago, draining his savings and losing his independence. I thought about the legal documents I had discovered 3 months ago while organizing my father's paperwork. The will, dated 15 years earlier, split everything evenly between Javier and me. But there was a newer document drafted just 2 years ago that changed everything. My father, in a moment of clarity I still did not fully understand, had updated his estate plan. The house, the property, everything tangible he owned had been transferred to me through a trust he established specifically for that purpose. I had asked him about it once carefully, not wanting to upset him. "Dad, I found some legal papers. Did you mean to change your will?" He had looked at me with tired eyes and nodded. "You're the one who stayed," he said simply. "You're the one who cared." I had not told Javier. I had not told anyone. Part of me wondered if my father even remembered doing it given his declining cognitive state. But the documents were legal, properly notarized, and filed with the county. I had consulted with an attorney just to be certain, and she had confirmed that the trust was ironclad. Tonight, as I stood in the cool night air, waiting for those 10 minutes to pass, I thought about how Javier had no idea what was coming. He had played his hand too early, too confidently, too cry. The party inside continued without me. Through the window, I could see Javier holding court, his arms spread wide as he told some story that made everyone laugh. My father sat in his chair at the head of the table, a paper crown askew on his head, smiling vaguely at the chaos around him. He looked tired. He always looked tired these days. I wondered if he understood what Javier had announced. Did he know his son planned to sell the house and put him in a facility, or had Javier simply told him some sanitized version of the plan, leaving out the parts about displacing me and pocketing the proceeds? The more I watched through that window, the more I realized something that made my chest ache. My family had never seen me as essential. They had seen me as convenient. I was the solution to a problem they did not want to deal with themselves. And now that Javier had decided to cash in on the property, they were all too willing to celebrate him for it, as if evicting me was an act of responsible adulthood rather than calculated cruelty. My phone buzzed, a text message, arriving in 5 minutes. I took a deep breath and walked to the front of the house, positioning myself where I could see the street. The neighborhood was quiet at this hour, just the distant sound of traffic and the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. I had lived on this street my entire childhood, had learned to ride a bike on this sidewalk, had walked to school from this front yard. Every inch of this property held memories, and not all of them were pleasant, but they were mine. Headlights turned onto our street. A dark sedan pulled up to the curb and 2 people stepped out. I recognized the woman immediately. Patricia, the estate attorney I'd been working with for the past 3 months. She was in her 50s, sharply dressed even at this hour, and carried a leather briefcase that I knew contained copies of every document we would need. The man with her was someone I did not recognize, but his badge was visible even from a distance. County official, probably from the recorder's office. Daniel, Patricia said as she approached, her voice low and professional. Are you ready to proceed? Yes, I said. My voice did not waver. Your brother made the announcement. He did in front of everyone. He told me to start packing because the house is his now and he's selling it. Patricia's expression remained neutral, but I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Disapproval, maybe, or vindication. She had warned me this might happen, that Javier would likely make a move once he sensed an opportunity. Then we need to clarify the situation immediately, she said. This is Gerald from the county recorder's office. He's here to verify the property records and serve official notice if necessary. Gerald nodded at me, his expression sympathetic. Ma'am, I understand this is a family matter, but we need to ensure that all parties are aware of the current legal ownership of this property. There seems to be some confusion. There is, I agreed. My brother believes he owns this house. He doesn't. According to the documents filed with the county 3 months ago, you are correct. Gerald confirmed. The property was transferred into an irrevocable trust with you as the sole beneficiary. Your father retains lifetime residency rights, but ownership transferred to you legally and completely. Patricia opened her briefcase and withdrew a folder. We have certified copies here. Deed transfer, trust documents, notarized affidavit, everything is in order. If your brother is claiming ownership and threatening to sell the property, we need to make the legal reality clear to him and your family immediately. I looked back at the house. Through the window, I could still see Javier laughing, drinking, basking in the congratulations of people who had no idea he was celebrating a lie. Let's go inside, I said. We walked to the front door together, Patricia and Gerald flanking me like reinforcements I had waited years to call. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the doorknob, but I steadied myself. This was not about revenge, though I would not deny the satisfaction I felt. This was about protecting my father and reclaiming the respect I deserved. The moment we entered, the noise level dropped. Conversations faltered as people noticed the 2 official-looking strangers in the doorway. Javier turned, his smile fading into confusion. Daniela, he said, his tone questioning. Who are these people? This is Patricia, my attorney, I said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. And this is Gerald from the county recorder's office. They're here to clarify some misconceptions about the ownership of this property. Javier's face went through a series of expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, irritation, then a forced laugh that sounded more nervous than amused. What are you talking about? There's no misconception. Dad and I discussed this. The house is being sold and I'm handling it. Did you discuss it with Dad? I asked, looking at my father. Dad, did Javier tell you he was going to sell the house and move you into a facility? My father looked between us, his confusion evident. Javier said something about making arrangements, he said slowly. I thought he meant for more help around the house. There's your answer, I said, turning back to Javier. You didn't discuss anything. You made an assumption. I'm his son, Javier snapped, his composure cracking. I have every right to make decisions about his property. Actually, you don't, Patricia interjected smoothly. She opened the folder and withdrew the top document. This property is no longer part of your father's estate. It was transferred 3 months ago into a trust with Daniela as the sole beneficiary. Your father retains residency rights for life, but he cannot sell it, and neither can you. Daniela is the legal owner. The room went completely silent. I watched Javier's face as the words sank in, watched the color drain from his cheeks, and the confidence evaporate from his eyes. That's impossible, he whispered. It's documented and recorded, Gerald added, holding up his own set of papers. I've verified it personally, the deed is clear. Javier stared at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Around the room, family members exchanged confused glances, their celebration frozen mid-motion like a photograph of something that was never real to begin with. Let me see that. Javier finally managed. Reaching for the papers Patricia held, she handed them over without hesitation. These are certified copies. The originals are filed with the county. Everything is legal and binding. Javier's hand shook as he scanned the documents. I watched his eyes move over the words, watched him search desperately for some loophole, some mistake that would restore his fantasy of control. But there was nothing. Patricia and I had been meticulous. Every signature was in place, every date correct, every legal requirement satisfied. When did you do this? Javier demanded, looking up at me with something between rage and disbelief. When did you convince Dad to sign away his house? I didn't convince him of anything, I said calmly. He made this decision 2 years ago with the help of his own attorney. I only found out about it 3 months ago when I was organizing his files, and I had it verified because I wanted to make sure it was legitimate. This is fraud, Javier spat. You manipulated him. He wasn't in his right mind. Your father was thoroughly evaluated by 2 independent physicians before signing these documents, Patricia said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. He was deemed mentally competent and aware of his decisions. The notary who witnessed the signing confirmed he understood what he was doing. Any attempt to challenge this in court will fail, and you'll waste time and money in the process. Why didn't anyone tell me? Javier's voice rose, drawing more attention from our relatives, who had been listening in stunned silence. Why didn't you tell me, Dad? My father looked small in his chair, overwhelmed by the confrontation unfolding around him. I don't remember, he admitted quietly, but I must have had my reasons. Your reason was that I'm the one who stayed, I said, stepping closer to Javier. I'm the one who gave up my life to take care of you. I'm the one who paid for repairs, covered bills, and made sure this house didn't fall apart. While you were busy building your career and your life, I was here every single day. You lived here for free, Javier shot back, his face wreathing. Don't act like you made some noble sacrifice. You had a free place to live. I paid for the new roof, I said, my voice rising despite my attempts to stay calm. I paid for the plumbing repairs, the fence, the property taxes when Dad didn't have enough. I've spent over $60,000 of my own money on this house in 6 years. Where were you? Where was your contribution? Javier had no answer. He looked around the room as if expecting someone to defend him, to validate his position. But our relatives suddenly seemed very interested in their plates, their drinks, anything except the confrontation happening in front of them. You're making this up, Javier said, though his voice lacked conviction. You're exaggerating. I have receipts, I said. Every payment, every repair, every bill I covered. Patricia has copies of all of them. I documented everything because I knew you'd try something like this eventually. My aunt, who had laughed so hardly at Javier's announcement just minutes ago, cleared her throat. Maybe we should let them work this out privately, she suggested weakly. No, I said firmly. You all heard him announce that he was kicking me out. You all toasted him and congratulated him. You all laughed when he called me a freeloader. Now you can hear the truth. Gerald, who had been standing quietly near the door, stepped forward. I need to serve formal notice, he said apologetically. Mr. Javier, you are hereby notified that any attempt to sell, transfer, or otherwise dispose of this property will be considered fraudulent and subject to legal action. The property is owned by Miss Daniela through an irrevocable trust. Any contracts you may have initiated or discussed with potential buyers are void and unenforceable. I have a buyer lined up, Javier said desperately. We're in negotiations. I've already agreed on a price. Then you committed fraud, Patricia said bluntly. You attempted to sell property you don't own. That's a serious legal issue. And if your buyer pursues action against you, Daniela is not liable. You are. The weight of his situation seemed to finally hit Javier. His face went from red to pale in seconds. I was trying to help Dad, he said, his voice cracking. I was trying to make sure he had the money for proper care. By selling his house without his informed consent, I asked. By kicking out the person who's been caring for him, that was your plan for helping him. I didn't know about any trust, Javier protested. I didn't know Dad transferred the property. You didn't know because you never bothered to check, I said. You assumed you'd inherit everything when the time came. You assumed I'd just disappear when you decided it was convenient. You never asked what Dad wanted. You never asked what I'd sacrificed. You just showed up tonight and decided to take everything. My father struggled to stand and I moved quickly to help him. He gripped my arm, his hand weak but steady. Daniela stays, he said, his voice quiet but clear. This is her home. Those 4 words silenced whatever protest Javier had been forming. Our father, confused as he might have been about many things, was absolute on this point. I was staying. This was my home. Javier looked at Dad, at me, at the document still clutched in his hand, and something broke in his expression. The confidence that had carried him through the evening, through years of assuming he was entitled to everything, crumbled. This isn't over, he said. But even he did not sound convinced. Yes, it is, Patricia said. Unless you want to challenge this in court, which I strongly advise against, you'll lose and you'll damage what's left of your family relationships in the process. Javier set the documents down on the table with more force than necessary. I need air, he muttered, pushing past Gerald toward the door. My uncle stood up. Javier, wait. But Javier was already gone, the front door slamming behind him hard enough to rattle the windows. The silence he left behind was thick and uncomfortable. My uncle shifted uncomfortably, finally breaking the silence that had settled over the dining room like a heavy fog. Daniel, I think maybe we all misunderstood the situation. You didn't misunderstand anything, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through me. You heard exactly what Javier said. You laughed and toasted to him. You called me a freeloader. You believed his version without question because it was easier than acknowledging what I've actually done for this family. My aunt sat down her wine glass with a soft click. We didn't know about the money you spent on the house. You never asked, I replied. In 6 years, not one of you asked how I was managing financially. Not one of you offered to help with expenses. You all just assumed I was living for free and took Javier's word that he was being generous by letting me stay. Patricia closed her briefcase with a decisive snap. I'll leave these documents with you, she said, handing me a folder. Everything is in order. If your brother or anyone else questions the ownership, direct them to my office. Gerald will file his report with the county tonight confirming that proper notice has been served. Thank you, I said, accepting the folder. I appreciate you coming on such short notice. That's what you're paying me for, Patricia said with a slight smile. Though I have to say, watching that man's face when he realized he'd been wrong was worth the drive. Gerald nodded his agreement. I've seen a lot of property disputes, but this one was particularly satisfying to resolve. Take care, miss. They left together and I closed the door behind them. When I turned back to face my family, I found them all staring at me with expressions ranging from shame to confusion to something that might have been respect. My father was still standing, leaning heavily on the back of his chair. I'm tired, he announced. I want to go to bed. I'll help you, Dad, I said, moving to his side. I can do it, my cousin offered, standing up quickly. She was younger than me, mid-20s, and had always been kind even when others were not. It's okay, Vanessa, I said. I've got him. I helped my father navigate the hallway to his bedroom, a process that had become routine over the years. He moved slowly, each step careful and deliberate. I helped him sit on the edge of his bed and knelt to remove his shoes. Did I do the right thing? He asked suddenly, his voice small. With the house. I looked up at him. His eyes were watery, tired, but there was a clarity in them that had been absent at dinner. You did the right thing, Dad. You took care of the daughter who took care of you. That's not wrong. Javier is angry. Javier will get over it, I said, though I was not entirely sure that was true. He's angry because he was counting on something that was never his to count on. He's still my son. I know, and I'm still your daughter. You don't have to choose between us, Dad. You just have to let him accept reality. I helped him change into his pajamas and settled him under the covers. He fell asleep almost immediately, exhaustion claiming him the moment his head hit the pillow. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him breathe, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility and love that had defined the last 6 years of my life. When I returned to the dining room, the party had dissolved. Several relatives were gathering their things, avoiding eye contact as they prepared to leave. My aunt approached me cautiously. Daniela, I want to apologize, she said. We shouldn't have laughed. We shouldn't have assumed. No, you shouldn't have. I agreed. But you did. And now you know better. Is there anything we can do to help? You can start by not treating me like I'm taking advantage of anyone, I said. And maybe if you really want to help, you can check in on Dad more often. He gets lonely. She nodded, her expression pained. We will, I promise. Others offered similar apologies as they filed out, their words varying, but the sentiment the same. We did not know. We are sorry. We will do better. I accepted their apologies with grace. I did not entirely feel, understanding that people often chose the easiest narrative until reality forced them to see differently. Vanessa was one of the last to leave. She hugged me tightly at the door. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen, she whispered, standing up to everyone like that. I'm proud of you. Thank you, I said, surprised by the emotion that welled up at her words. That means a lot. If you need anything, call me. I mean it. After everyone left, I returned to the dining room and surveyed the damage. Half-eaten plates of food, empty wine glasses, crumpled napkins, the detritus of a celebration that had turned into something else entirely. I began clearing the table, a task that felt both mundane and surreal after everything that had happened. I was loading the dishwasher when I heard the front door open. My body tensed instinctively, but it was just Javier. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen, looking deflated and smaller than I had ever seen him. Can we talk? He asked. About what? I continued loading dishes, not looking at him. About tonight. About everything. What's there to talk about, Javier? You tried to steal the house and kick me out. You humiliated me in front of the entire family. You called me a freeloader after I spent 6 years holding everything together. What conversation do you think we need to have? I didn't know, he said. About the money you spent, about the trust. I genuinely thought the house was still Dad's to leave to both of us. You didn't know because you never asked, I said, finally turning to face him. You never asked how much the roof cost or who paid the property taxes. You never asked what it was like to be here every day watching Dad decline, managing his care, giving up my own life. You just assumed everything would work out in your favor because it always has. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Javier. But it's honest. I earned this house through years of sacrifice. Dad recognized that even if you never did. He was quiet for a long moment. I have a buyer who's going to be furious when I tell him the deal is off. That's your problem to solve. I said. You created it by selling something you didn't own. What am I supposed to tell him? The truth. That you made a mistake. That the property isn't yours to sell. Whatever consequences come from that, you'll have to handle them. Javier rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture of frustration I remembered from childhood. I'm in trouble, he admitted. I promised this buyer signed preliminary agreements he could sue me. Then you'll deal with it, I said like an adult, like someone who made a serious error in judgment. Javier slumped into one of the dining room chairs, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. For the first time in decades, I saw him as something other than the confident older brother who always had the answers. He looked lost. I've been struggling financially, he said quietly. The real estate market has been brutal. I've had deals fall through, clients back out. I needed this sale. I needed the commission and my share of the proceeds. So, you decided to sell Dad's house without telling anyone the full truth, I said, including Dad himself. I was going to take care of him, Javier insisted. I had a facility picked out, a nice place with good care. Did Dad agree to go there? Javier did not answer, which was answer enough. You were going to make all these decisions for him without his consent, I said. And you were going to push me out in the process, all because you needed money. I thought I was doing the right thing, Javier said, though he did not sound convinced even as he said it. I thought I was being practical, making the hard choices that needed to be made. The right thing would have been asking for help, I said. The right thing would have been being honest about your financial situation, instead of trying to profit off Dad's property. The right thing would have been acknowledging that someone else was already handling everything you claimed needed handling. I know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I know that now. I sat down across from him, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. What did you tell your buyer? His name is Troy. He's a developer who wants to tear down the house and build a modern duplex. He was willing to pay significantly over market value because of the lot size and location. How significantly? $400. I told him we could close in 60 days. I let out a low whistle. That's well above what this place is worth. I know it was too good to pass up. I would have gotten a 6% commission plus my half of the proceeds after Dad's care was covered. It would have solved all my problems. Except the house wasn't yours to sell and Dad never agreed to any of this. I thought I could convince him, Javier admitted. I thought if I presented it as the logical solution, he'd agree. And I thought you'd just go along with it, because you always go along with things. I go along with things because I'm the one who has to keep the peace and keep this family functioning, I said. But there's a difference between compromising for the sake of harmony and letting someone steamroll me. You crossed that line tonight. Javier was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. What happens now? Now you call Troy and tell him the truth. You apologize for wasting his time, and you accept whatever consequences come from backing out of your preliminary agreement. He's going to sue me, maybe. Or maybe he'll just be angry and move on. But that's your responsibility to handle, not mine. And us, Javier asked, looking up at me. What happens with us? I considered the question carefully. Part of me wanted to tell him to leave and never come back, to cut him out of my life as cleanly as he had tried to cut me out of this house. But he was still my brother. And despite everything, I did not want to destroy what was left of our family. That depends on you, I said finally. If you can accept that this house is mine, that Dad is my responsibility, and that I'm not going anywhere, then maybe we can rebuild some kind of relationship. But it has to start with you respecting the reality of the situation. I can do that, Javier said quickly. I swear I can. And no more comments about me being a freeloader. No more suggestions that I'm taking advantage of Dad. No more undermining me in front of the family. Agreed. And if you're struggling financially, you come to me honestly instead of trying to scheme your way into money that isn't yours. Javier flinched at that, but nodded. I hear you. I mean it, Javier. One more stunt like tonight and I'm done. Dad is done. You'll be out of our lives completely. It won't happen again, he promised. I wanted to believe him. Some part of me. The part that remembered playing together as children and helping each other with homework and navigating the grief of losing our mother together, wanted desperately to believe he could change. But trust, once broken, was not easily repaired. You should go, I said, standing up. It's late, and I need to clean up this mess. Javier stood as well, hesitating as if he wanted to say something more. Finally, he just nodded and walked to the door. He paused at the threshold, looking back at me. For what it's worth, he said. I'm sorry. I really am. I know, I said. But sorry doesn't fix what you broke. You're going to have to prove you've changed through actions, not words. After he left, I finished cleaning the kitchen in silence. The house felt different somehow, as if the confrontation had shifted something fundamental in its foundation. Or maybe it was just that I felt different. For years, I had absorbed the subtle and not so subtle disrespect from my family, had let them believe I was less important, less capable, less worthy of consideration. Tonight, I had finally pushed back. I had defended myself and the life I had built here. It felt good. Terrifying and exhausting and exhilarating all at once, but good. I checked on my father one more time before heading to my own room. He was still sleeping soundly, his face peaceful in the dim light from the hallway. Whatever memories he retained of tonight's drama would probably fade by morning, lost in the fog of his declining cognition. But I would remember. I would carry this night with me as proof that I could stand up for myself, that I could fight for what mattered. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought about Patricia's satisfied smile when Javier's confidence crumbled. I thought about Gerald's sympathetic nod as he served the legal notice. I thought about Vanessa's hug and her whispered words of pride. Most of all, I thought about my father's simple declaration. Daniela stays. This is her home. After 6 years of sacrifice and struggle, of being overlooked and undervalued, I had finally been seen. The house was legally mine. But more importantly, my worth had been acknowledged. Not by everyone, not yet, but by the people who mattered most. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Javier would have to deal with Troy. The family would have to adjust to the new reality. My father would continue to need care, and I would continue to provide it. But tonight, I could rest knowing that nobody would ever again try to take away what I had fought so hard to maintain. The morning after my father's birthday brought an unexpected calm to the house. I woke early, as always, the habit of 6 years impossible to break, even on days when I desperately wanted to sleep. Sunlight filtered through my bedroom curtains, painting soft gold patterns across the walls I had painted myself 3 years ago. I padded down the hallway to check on my father and found him awake, sitting up in bed with a confused expression. "Where is everyone?" he asked. "The party ended last night, Dad. Everyone went home." I helped him stand and guided him through his morning routine, the familiar rituals of medication and breakfast that structured both of our days. "Did I have a good time?" he asked as I set a plate of scrambled eggs in front of him. "I think so," I said. "You seemed happy." He nodded slowly, already forgetting the question he had asked. Some days were better than others, but the progression of his condition was undeniable. Within a year, maybe 2, he would need more care than I could provide alone. But that was a bridge I would cross when I reached it. And whatever decisions needed to be made would be made by me, not by a brother who appeared only when it benefited him. My phone rang just after 9. I did not recognize the number, but answered anyway, half expecting it to be Javier calling from an unknown line. "Is this Daniela?" a male voice asked. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Troy Hamilton. I'm the developer who was in negotiations to purchase your property. Your brother Javier gave me your number and suggested I speak with you directly." I closed my eyes, already exhausted by the conversation before it had properly begun. "Mr. Hamilton, I apologize for any confusion my brother created, but he had no authority to negotiate a sale. The property is mine, legally transferred through a trust, and it's not for sale. So, he told me this morning," Troy said, his tone surprisingly calm. "I have to admit I'm disappointed. This was an ideal location for the project I had in mind. But I understand these things happen. I'm actually calling to ask if you'd consider selling under different terms." "I'm not interested in selling," I said firmly. "I understand, but if you ever change your mind, I'd be willing to pay the same price I offered your brother, maybe even slightly more given the complications. Here's my card." He rattled off contact information that I did not bother writing down. "Think about it. That's all I ask. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Hamilton, but this is my home. I'm not selling." "Fair enough. And for what it's worth, your brother seemed genuinely remorseful when he called me this morning to explain the situation. He took full responsibility for the miscommunication." After Troy hung up, I sat at the kitchen table feeling a strange mixture of emotions. Relief that the developer was not threatening legal action, surprised that Javier had actually followed through on calling him, and underneath it all, a persistent wariness that this was not truly over. My phone rang again an hour later. This time it was my aunt. "Daniela, honey, I've been thinking about what happened last night," she said. "Your uncle and I would like to help with Dad's care. Maybe we could set up a schedule where we take him one weekend a month to give you a break." "That would be helpful," I said cautiously. "Thank you, and we'd like to contribute to the household expenses. It's not right that you've been carrying that burden alone. I appreciate that. I mean it, sweetheart. We should have been more involved all along. We should have asked questions instead of making assumptions." Similar calls came throughout the day. My cousin Vanessa offered to visit twice a week to help with household tasks. Another uncle volunteered to handle some of the heavier outdoor maintenance. Even relatives I had barely spoken to in years reached out to offer support or simply to apologize for their behavior at the party. By evening, I felt overwhelmed by the sudden attention. It was what I had wanted for years: acknowledgement, help, shared responsibility. But now that it was being offered, I felt strangely suspicious of it. Were they genuinely sorry or just embarrassed that they had been exposed as complicit in Javier's cruelty? Javier himself did not call, which was probably wise. I needed space from him, time to process everything that had happened before I could consider rebuilding any kind of relationship. 3 days after the party, Patricia called with an update. "I thought you should know that your brother retained an attorney to review the trust documents. She said they're not challenging anything, just confirming that everything is as I presented it. And his attorney confirmed that the trust is ironclad. There's no basis for challenge. He'll receive a formal letter to that effect by the end of the week. So, it's really over. It's really over. The house is yours legally and permanently. Your brother has no claim to it." I felt something release in my chest, a tension I had been carrying since that moment at the party when Javier first made his announcement. "Thank you, Patricia, for everything." "You're welcome. You fought for yourself when no one else would. That takes courage. Be proud of what you did." 2 weeks passed and life settled into a new normal. My father's care continued as it always had, but now with the added support of family members who finally understood what I had been managing alone. Vanessa came by every Tuesday and Thursday evening, helping with laundry and meal preparation while chatting with my father about his favorite old movies. My aunt and uncle took him for weekend visits twice a month, giving me genuine time to rest and work on my freelance projects without interruption. The change in family dynamics was subtle but significant. People asked me how I was doing, not just how Dad was doing. They acknowledged my work, both the caregiving and the design projects that paid my bills. They stopped making jokes about free housing and started recognizing the sacrifice I had made. Javier remained distant and I did not push for contact. I heard through family gossip that he was dealing with financial consequences from the failed sale. Troy had not sued him, but word had spread in the real estate community about his attempt to sell property he did not own. His reputation took a hit, and several potential clients backed away from working with him. I felt no satisfaction from his professional struggles, but I also felt no sympathy. He had created his own problems through arrogance and dishonesty. The consequences were his to manage. On a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the party, Javier's car pulled into the driveway. I watched from the kitchen window as he sat in his vehicle for several minutes, seeming to gather courage. Finally, he got out and approached the front door. I opened it before he could knock. "Javier, can I come in?" he asked. "I'd like to talk to Dad and to you if you're willing." I stepped aside, letting him enter. My father was napping in his recliner, the television playing quietly in the background. Javier stood in the living room doorway, looking at him with an expression I could not quite read. "He looks peaceful," Javier said softly. "He is most days. Can we sit down?" We settled at the kitchen table, the same spot where so many difficult conversations had taken place over the years. Javier pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it." Inside was a check for $25,000 made out to me. I stared at it, confused. "What is this for?" "It's partial repayment for the money you spent on the house," Javier said. I tallied up the receipts you mentioned, the ones your attorney has copies of. You said you spent over $60,000 in 6 years. This is what I can afford to give you right now. I'll pay the rest in installments over the next 2 years. "Javier, I didn't ask for this." "I know, but you deserve it. You invested in this property. In Dad's care, in keeping our family home standing. That money should be acknowledged." I set the check down carefully. "This doesn't fix what happened. I know that too. But it's a start. I'm also going to be here more. 1 weekend a month. I'll stay in my old room and take primary care of Dad. You can go away, visit friends, do whatever you need to do. No questions, no conditions." "Why the change?" I asked, genuinely curious. 2 weeks ago, you tried to kick me out. Now you want to help." Javier leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "Because I had time to think about who I've become. The failed sale wasn't the wake-up call. Not really. It was watching you stand up to me in front of everyone. Seeing how the family rallied around you once they knew the truth. Realizing that I was the villain in a story where I thought I was the hero. That's very self-aware. My therapist helped." He offered a wry smile. "I started seeing someone. Turns out I have some issues with money control, and a deep-seated fear of being seen as unsuccessful. Who knew?" Despite everything, I almost laughed. "I'm glad you're getting help. I want to be a better brother, a better son. I can't undo what I said at the party or the years I spent being absent. But I can do better going forward if you'll let me." I looked at the check, at my brother's earnest expression, at the man who had hurt me so deeply trying to make amends. Trust was not something I could give him immediately. He had broken too much for that. But I could give him a chance to earn it back. 1 weekend a month, I said. You commit to that. No cancellations, no excuses, and the financial contributions continue as promised. Done. And you treat me with respect in front of the family, in private, always. Absolutely. Then we can try slowly with clear boundaries. Javier nodded, relief washing over his face. Thank you. I won't let you down. See that you don't. He stayed for an hour sitting with Dad when he woke up, chatting about safe, neutral topics. When he left, he hugged me at the door. A quick, awkward embrace that felt like a tentative first step towards something that might eventually resemble reconciliation. Months passed and the rhythm of life in the house evolved into something healthier than it had been in years. Javier kept his promise, showing up every 4th weekend to take over Dad's care. At first, I stayed home those weekends, not quite trusting that he could manage, but gradually, I began to leave. I visited friends I had not seen in years. I took short trips to the coast, breathing in salt air and remembering what it felt like to exist outside the walls of caretaking. My freelance business grew as I had more time and mental energy to dedicate to it. I took on bigger projects, raised my rates, and started building the kind of portfolio I had always dreamed of creating. The checks from Javier helped replenish my savings, and the family contributions toward household expenses meant I was no longer drowning financially. My father's condition continued its slow decline, but he remained comfortable and safe at home. On good days, he recognized everyone and told stories from his youth. On bad days, he was confused and agitated, but we managed with patience and love. Through it all, he stayed in the house he had lived in for 40 years, surrounded by memories and family. The family dynamic shifted permanently. People no longer took my contributions for granted. They asked before making assumptions. They showed up when they said they would. The relationships would never be perfect, but they were real in a way they had not been before. One evening about 8 months after that disastrous birthday party, I sat on the back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. My father was inside watching a game show with Vanessa, their laughter drifting through the open window. I held a glass of iced tea and felt something I had not felt in years. Contentment. My phone buzzed with a text from Javier. "Dad seems good today," told me a story about when we were kids that I'd completely forgotten. Made me realize how much time I wasted staying away. "Thanks for giving me the chance to fix things," I responded. "We're all doing our best. Keep showing up." "Will do." "Oh, and I got a new client today. Things are turning around professionally. Thought you'd want to know." "That's great. Happy for you." I set the phone down and returned my attention to the sky. The path to this moment had been painful and unexpected. I had not planned to confront my family so publicly. I had not intended to become the owner of the house through a trust I did not know existed. I had not imagined standing up to Javier in front of everyone and watching his confidence crumble. But when the moment came, I had been ready. All those years of quiet sacrifice, of swallowing my pride, of choosing family peace over personal recognition, had built a foundation of strength I had not recognized in myself. When I needed to fight, I knew exactly what I was fighting for and why it mattered. The revenge, if it could be called that, was not in humiliating Javier or watching him suffer consequences. It was in claiming what was rightfully mine. It was in forcing my family to see me as a person worthy of respect and consideration. It was in refusing to be dismissed, erased, or pushed aside anymore. As the years passed, my father's health would eventually fail completely. That day was coming, inevitable and heartbreaking. But when it arrived, I would know that I had given him the best possible final years. He had stayed in his home, maintained his dignity, and been surrounded by love that was worth more than any inheritance or family approval. And I had discovered something essential about myself in the process. I was stronger than I believed, braver than I felt, and deserving of every bit of security and respect I had fought to claim. The house stood behind me, solid and familiar, its walls holding decades of memories and years of my own hard work. It was mine now, truly and legally mine. Not because I had manipulated anyone or schemed for personal gain, but because my father had recognized my dedication and chosen to honor it. Javier faced real consequences in the months that followed the party. His reputation in the real estate community suffered significantly, and several major deals fell through when potential clients learned about his attempt to sell property he did not own. He lost 2 important contracts and struggled to rebuild trust with his professional network. Financially, he had to borrow money to cover the penalties from breaking his preliminary agreement with Troy, and the debt weighed heavily on him for over a year. His marriage faced strain as his wife confronted the extent of his dishonesty and poor judgment. The family, while eventually forgiving, never fully trusted him with important decisions again. He spent 2 years in therapy working through the issues that had led him to such reckless behavior. And while he eventually rebuilt his career and relationships, he carried the shame of that night for the rest of his life. As for me, I sat on my porch in the home I had earned, watching the sunset and feeling grateful for the courage I had found when I needed it most. My revenge was not destruction, but reclamation, taking back my dignity, my home, and my future from those who thought they could simply take it away. And in that quiet evening moment, surrounded by the life I had built and protected, I understood that sometimes the sweetest victory is simply refusing to disappear.